Deputy Speaker, I do believe that to a greater extent that this report has achieved the objectives that we set out to do against that particular policy framework. While I would like to, and I note that the conditions, of which there are 18 in the report, are there in the report to be read, I would like to concentrate on recommendation 18, which within regard to detention costs. Before I progress on that, I would also like to record that while in Sydney, the committee had the opportunity of speaking to people who are released on bridging visas who had previously been for many years in detention centres. It was quite striking to me on a personal basis the fact that these people were damaged by their experience of long-term, indefinite and interminable detention. The evidence that the committee received about the length of detention was highly indicative of the fact that people have to understand how long they are placed in detention for. It was the indefiniteness, the interminable period, the not knowing, the uncertainty that caused great distress, great mental anguish that actually led to depression and mental illness in the people who were detained. Many had been detained for years, not knowing if and when they would be released or what the outcome of their process was. And this was another problem. It seemed almost impossible for detainees to actually find out exactly where their particular application was in the pipeline of procedure and process. So this is one of the reasons that we wanted to ensure in this report with the recommendations that the process and the practice was open and transparent, and there were appropriate time checks. A review by DIAC itself after 3 months, if anyone still remained in detention, an ombudsman's review that was going to be tabled in Parliament with an advisory review to the Minister from the Ombudsman at a 6-month time frame. And for anyone who was maintained in detention would only be there because they were an unacceptable and significant ongoing risk to the Australian community. Those people, if they were still in detention at 12-month period, would have access to an independent tribunal review, and subsequently, if they were still unsatisfied with the result, would then be able to process to judicial review. And I think that really allows people to understand who are held in detention exactly the process that's going to happen to them, and will hopefully alleviate any concerns regarding depression and mental illness. The people that we did see on this particular occasion, many of whom were Asian, they were all Asian people actually, but the middle-aged women who had been held in detention for many years, which would hardly be of any assault onto the Australian security, were broken women. And they particularly found it very hard. One of the gentlemen, a man from Korea, was a highly qualified engineer, and it seemed entirely inappropriate that a man such as that, with a category of qualifications which this country actually needs right now with our skill shortages, should be held in such a position. So the government, of course, must have its mandatory checks, must make sure we have a wider duty of care to the Australian people, but it seems that there is a better way in which we do not need to damage people to the extent that I saw these people damaged. Another process that we found, and that's one of the conditions, recommendation number 18, was about detention debt and how that impacted on people. Now, we actually recommended that, this particular aspect of the detention process be actually reviewed, and I understand the Minister is reviewing this. The recommendation was that it be completely abandoned. The policy for charging a detention debt began in 1992. Now, the current charge for an individual being held in immigration detention is $125.40 a day. Spouses and dependent children are also liable for charges, and a parent or guardian is also liable for the cost of a dependent child. In the last 4 financial years, a total of 17,355 detainees have been invoiced with a detention debt amounting to the sum of over $170 million. The committee received evidence that Australia is the only country in the world to charge people for immigration detention. Further, Australia does not charge people for other forms of detention, such as prisons or under mental health or quarantine acts. The practice of applying detention charges would not appear to provide any substantial revenue or contribute in any way to offsetting the costs of the detention policy. Further, it is likely that the administrative costs outweigh or are approximately equal to the debts recovered, and in 2004-5, less than 2.5% of the detention debt invoiced had been recovered. This is because most debts are either left unpaid, they are waived or written off by the Department of Finance and Administration. The committee received evidence, and this is what was important to us, about the negative impacts of this policy on former detainees' mental health, their financial security, or their ability to leave and return to Australia. Even where a debt was eventually written off or repaid, former detainees still received an invoice for a large amount of money, causing considerable stress and anxiety. Where a debt was written off, detainees were aware that the government could choose to call in that debt at any time, with detrimental effects on their ability to make a financial commitment and to get on with life. The policy may be functioning as a way of keeping former detainees out of Australia, since having a debt to the Commonwealth makes it difficult to get another visa into Australia. However, if there are people we genuinely don't want to return to this country, we don't need to rely on debts, as there are other provisions in the Immigration Act that would allow DIAC or the Minister to achieve this end. The evidence that the committee received on the detention debt policy was uniformly damning, asking that the policy be abolished. No evidence was received in support of the policy, and the committee was unanimous in its recommendation. At least no objections at all were voiced in report consideration meetings. No evidence was received to suggest that the policy was a deterrent to people coming to Australia unlawfully. I understand also that the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship has said that this policy is currently under review and has admitted that he does see little logic in it. And I do think that the recommendation number 18, I do commend that to the Minister, as we do all the recommendations of the committee. I want to again thank my co-members on the committee, thank them for their diligence and for their continued interest and for their genuine openness and honesty with which this issue has been deliberated by the committee at some length. And I commend the report not only to the Minister, but I heartfully commend it to the people of Australia. Thank you, Madam Acting Chair.